beautifully be interwoven. That's the delightful experience that we had last night. As I mentioned to you yesterday, the vision statement, which was issued at the conclusion of the summit, provides a roadmap for realizing the strategic partnership. We have raised ourselves to a strategic partnership between India and ASEAN. And the other important outcome of the summit was the announcement by leaders that the economic ministers of India and ASEAN have concluded negotiations on the ASEAN-India trade in services and investment agreements. Having signed the agreement on goods earlier, we were all anxiously waiting for the agreement on services and investment. And this, as I said yesterday, will be signed shortly, now that the formalities will be completed. We've gratified that all the ASEAN leaders have appreciated India's continued support for community building efforts and the initiative for ASEAN Integration Work Plan 2 towards narrowing development gaps and realizing truly an ASEAN community by 2015. And amongst the important steps that we hope to take now, we will continue to work towards ASEAN-India economic integration. There will be, as you've noticed yesterday, enormous emphasis on improving connectivity in all dimensions. The Prime Minister has repeatedly mentioned this: geographic, institutional, people to people, including air, sea, and digital connectivity in further strengthening our partnership. There will be emphasis on the India-Myanmar-Thailand trilateral highway, for which we have a target of 2016. Its extension to Laos, PDR and Cambodia, and the India-Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia highway. And the Mekong-India Economic Corridor, which proposes to connect Chennai Port with Dawei Deep Port in Myanmar, and further connecting it to the production centers in the Mekong region. So it's a web of connectivity that and it's an ambitious web of connectivity that we're all working towards complete agreement on the different dimensions and aspects, and complete commitment as a major step towards integration. To sustain this momentum, this is obviously quite a task. I have invited all the foreign ministers of ASEAN countries to the 5th edition of the Delhi Dialogue 5, which will be held in New Delhi from 18th to 19th February 2013. For India, the relationship with the ASEAN is not just about economic development, it is also about a vision of a stable, secure and prosperous Asia, as was repeatedly emphasized by the Honorable Prime Minister. The advancement in terms of concluding negotiations on the FTA and services investments that I mentioned, and the elevation of relationships to the strategic level will allow us to fast-track our ambitious commitment to the process of integration between ASEAN and India. And I think that for all of you and for us, this is, in that sense, living history, an important milestone towards a vision that began with our great leaders, our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and subsequently translated into Look East policy of India's Indian government. And I hope that you all are equally part of it, so congratulations. I'll take some questions.
What we will do is, just for the sake of order, all the questions related to ASEAN we will ask first, and then if you have any other questions, the Minister will be glad to take it. ASEAN related.
So you are telling about strategic dialogue. Now, what's the level of a strategic dialogue or partnership you are thinking of with so many countries associated with ASEAN? Is this type of a strategic partnership, is it possible, multilateral organization?
Well, absolutely. We think it's entirely possible, which is not to say that when you engage in a multilateral strategic partnership, you will do it at the cost of developing bilateral relations, and that the two-track process continues. Wherever there is potential, need, and visionary necessity for building on bilateral relations, we will continue to do so, but with the hope that those will become building blocks also ultimately for greater multilateral engagement. Now, if ASEAN integrates, then you're dealing with not 10 countries, but you're dealing with one organization. And that's the idea of partnership. Within the ASEAN region, in the process of integrating, obviously they have different mechanisms and different groups and committees that work towards integration. But what we get is when they speak with us in partnership mode, they speak with one voice, and what we hope to do is to provide resonance to that voice. So the integration that is taking place within ASEAN can be fortified by our partnership, and the advantage that we can get by including ourselves in the larger sphere is and contributing by becoming part of that larger area of engagement is what we would like to do. And strategic partnership obviously has some elements that can be seen as important elements. So the important elements relate to environmental issues, relate to connectivity, relate to ability to reach out in significant way when you are needed to be able to reach out, as in disaster management. On security dialogue issues, that's extremely important to understand each other and each other's aspirations and concerns in security dialogues are also a very, very significant part of strategic relationships. So I think that there is no ambiguity, doubt, or any confusion as far as the content of the strategic partnership is concerned. Do we have something similar elsewhere? Well, obviously, in the most concentrated way, this is something that we have, in principle, we have in the SAARC region. But the difficulty in the SAARC region is that we don't have the same size of economies. So if you don't have the same size of economies, your attitude and your mechanisms have to accommodate that. But it's different for dealing with the SAARC region. The European Union, for instance, again, we have with the European Union, we have a strategic dialogue with the European Union, and therefore you could say that there are a lot of overlaps and similarities. But the fact that we have such a relationship with European Union means that there may well be a difference in what we do with European Union and what we do in this region. The cultural and historical connectivity here is much stronger. The reliance on each other in terms of investment trade is much stronger, and I think the car rally and the sail ship that has traveled, in a sense, has brought this out very, very, very explicitly as to what close connectivity we have. So we have to take advantage of that close connectivity rather than build on a connectivity. We must take advantage and fortify it. Otherwise, you build a connectivity, and that building of that connectivity is a longer process than an existing connectivity that needs to be fortified. This is a very specific advantage we have in the ASEAN region, and that's why our Look East policy in that sense becomes a very, very important dimension of our foreign policy.
Rajiv?
Mr. Khurshid, Vietnam is the only country which has mentioned China by name and has expressed concerns about Chinese policies vis-a-vis South China Sea region. I would like to know whether other leaders, during your bilateral meetings, other ASEAN leaders have also raised similar concerns with regard to China? And also, if you could give your reaction to Indian Naval Chief's remarks on South China Sea issue, which have drawn a very sharp reaction from China.
Well, as far as the Indian Navy Chief is concerned, I would urge you to factor in the vocabulary, the style, and the manner in which a person trained in the armed forces speaks. And I think that you would be unfair to him if plain speaking, which is what the armed forces are accustomed to doing, is taken on a level that creates ambiguity about how one approaches it in terms of bilateral relations. He's not responsible for bilateral relations. He's responsible for a specific job, which he does well, and he is an outstanding soldier. So I think that you must treat a soldier as a soldier. You must treat a politician as a politician and a diplomat as a diplomat. Don't confuse their roles. As far as China is concerned, this or any other matter, we do not believe that there is, for us, vis-a-vis China, any matter that comes anywhere near undermining what is an extremely beneficial, wholesome, and a substantive relationship with China. And it has grown, if I can't use the word by leaps and bounds, it has grown by steady steps towards a direction and a destination that we both share. And we believe that good and wholesome relations between India and China are not only good for ourselves mutually, but are also good for all of Asia and indeed for the rest of the world. A lot of people look upon us with great hope that India and China can collaborate, cooperate, and be strategic partners. Now, this is an important dimension that we would urge you to keep in mind. There will be, from time to time, issues that will arise on which it's possible that we have difference of opinion, that we have difference of emphasis. There may be issues that arise with between China and some other country on which we may have an opinion if we are asked for it, but we don't have to go looking for intervention or interference where it's not called for. I think every country in the region is capable of dealing with its problems with all of us as and when they arise. If it's a bilateral issue, it should be dealt with bilaterally. If it comes in a multilateral frame, then of course we will look at it multilaterally to the extent the rules of the game permit looking at it multilaterally. This was today a partnership for peace and prosperity between ASEAN and India, where we weren't looking at bilateral issues of either the countries involved in the ASEAN region or other countries in that region or in the vicinity. So this is not a matter that was on the agenda. Of course, it was raised by Vietnam. We noted it, and I think that's the best that we can do. We have already stated our commitment to international law of the sea. We have stated our commitment to freedom of navigation, and we have very categorically said that what we have off the shore, offshore from Vietnam in terms of prospecting for oil is something that goes back to 1988, not something that we are trying to barge into now. The ONGC has been prospecting for oil. It's a commercial arrangement with Vietnam. Sovereignty issues between Vietnam and any other country, between China and any other country, could be settled bilaterally. This has been our position, and I think we don't think that issues such as that should necessarily detract from the larger canvas and picture that we are concentrating on in a summit of this nature, and that's the attitude we've taken.
Ashwini?
So, in your bilateral with Malaysia,
Yeah, I'm listening.
in the bilateral with Malaysia, was the issue of the cancellation of the contract with GMR and Maldives taken up? And if so, has they sought any assurances, anything being planned jointly, sir?
they seek an assurance for what?
On the GMR airport project in Maldives, sir.
Well, the matter was mentioned. I wouldn't say that it was discussed in great detail. It was mentioned, and we wanted an update on their impressions, because the foreign minister had visited briefly for a day. He had visited Maldives, and I think that his takeaway was more or less the understanding that we have, that there are two separate issues, and we would rather the two issues were not confused and were not converged. One issue is a pure assessment of the contract and legal steps taken on that contract, which have now gone to arbitration in Singapore. And obviously the arbitration will come to some definite conclusions, including what are the entitlements of GMR after the contract was terminated. For the present, the rulings of the Singapore court relating to termination of that contract itself are binding on all parties, and that's what we have been saying all along, that whatever decision needs to be taken must be compliant with and consistent with decisions of courts whose jurisdiction has been accepted by both parties. And this is the feedback we had from GMR, that they've accepted that, the legal consequences of the judgment in Singapore. But they have obviously desired that there should be quick implementation of the subsequent consequences that arise from termination of the contract, including compensation, damages, etc., etc. And we have no report that there is any negativity as far as that is concerned. The other ground there was whether there were any political reasons for doing this. Now, if there were and are any political reasons, we would like, and we suggested to Maldives that we would like them to be contained and not to spill over into a very, very important, very valuable relationship that we have with Maldives. And I think that point also has been taken. It was more or less a confirmation of this that we got from the Malaysian side. And the disappointment that we felt, I think we have right to feel disappointed, was also felt by them. They have also been able to secure from the Maldivian government a letter in some form that indicates that performance or quality of performance was not the ground at all for termination of the contract. I think this was necessary for Malaysia for its future prospects elsewhere. That was not something that we had asked for or called for, and therefore we haven't received any such letter.
Yeah, Ranjit?
India has asserted repeatedly the right of freedom of navigation in South China Sea, but China has ignored those statements and has advised India not to engage in unilateral activity in South China Sea. Your reaction?
There's no unilateral activity in South China Sea. Our reiteration of the law of the sea is not something that's been directly challenged, questioned by China. As I said, the issue that China has raised bilaterally with some countries in the region is an issue about sovereignty that would be sorted out, presumably in appropriate dialogue between them. But obviously, any dialogue of a bilateral nature between two countries takes into account the broad parameters that are laid down by international law and the backdrop of international law. And I don't think, I've not come across any statement of China directly contradicting or repudiating anything we've said. They've reiterated their position, and we have said our position not once but several times. Whenever we have been called upon to articulate our position, we've articulated it. And I don't think that this has caused any disquiet or any discomfort between ourselves and China. We continue in a very meaningful, positive dialogue. That's at least my personal experience, and certainly the experience I can share with you that the Prime Minister has had in exchanges with their top leadership.
Are there any questions on ASEAN? Otherwise, we could move to other topics.
Sir, could you please elaborate on the digital connectivity?
Digital connectivity.
What
Well, digital connectivity is because we do realize that there's a very active youth movement in different parts of the world, but certainly in this case, particularly in ASEAN, where communications are being in a sense taken over by young people, and they are communicating directly through cyberspace, and therefore whatever we can do to encourage a wholesome exchange in cyberspace on issues that pertain to quality of life and the aspirations of young people in ASEAN countries, we have done, and we have encouraged it, and we will certainly be happy to participate in it. The other thing, of course, is digital connectivity is to ensure that there is obviously broadband connectivity amongst these countries. It's a lot easier today to provide digital connectivity. You can do it sitting in a room with powerful enough equipment than to provide physical connectivity, which actually means building the roads, infrastructure, putting the railway line, putting in all that it takes to maintain the road and railway line. But as I said to you, we are committed to doing all of them. One is not going to be a substitute of another. One will complement the other, and all of them will be in place.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question is, having talked about China's influence over ASEAN and India's disconnect with the issue, I want to ask you about the China's influence in Nepal. There have been repeated reports that India's goods and services are continuously being replaced by Chinese ones in Nepal. So what is your take on this, and what is India doing in this regard?
See, India has never insisted that there is any exclusive area of operation to the exclusion of any other country. In modern times, with modern connectivity and the internet, it's very difficult to claim any association or affiliation or as any friendship to be exclusive. We look at the content and substance of our own relationships with our friends. We are not concerned about anybody else seeking also their attention. I think we should have the confidence to know that both in historical terms, cultural terms, and in economic terms, what we offer is not in any way inferior to what anybody else can offer. And I see no reason why we should insist on offering second-class services and claim that and expect that somebody who offers better services should not be given attention. As far as Nepal is concerned, or for that matter any other country is concerned, Indian goods will have to compete in quality, in productivity and in price because there is an open marketplace. If these are not government-to-government contracts, government can facilitate for business to grow, and the relationships that we have with other countries become basically the canvas on which business can draw its own pictures. But we can't dictate, and we cannot restrict, and we certainly cannot contain anybody else coming into the market, particularly when we believe in open market competition. And I would certainly urge all our friends in business who see Nepal, both in terms of their past experiences and in their terms of their future plans, as a promise